Turn it up.
Okay.
Hello there, I'm Christine Bentley in studio with Kate Wheeler, and joining us now is the founder of PTPA, which stands for Parent Tested, Parent Approved. Sharon Venderine, welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Sharon, in addition to testing products for the 100,000 or so plus parents who visit your site each and every month, you're also considered an expert on parenting, a 5-star entrepreneur who's on TV and radio all the time talking about all kinds of things. So why did you start PTPA, very briefly?
I started it because as a mom of small, tiny little kids, I was really struggling with the products that I was purchasing. I was buying things that were super expensive because I thought they'd be fantastic for my kids. I'd bring them home, they'd fall apart, and I'd realize it's really not necessarily tied to how expensive a product is. And I really thought there needed to be a seal of approval that families could look for in order to figure out whether a product was good or not. And who's the best person to endorse that but other parents? So the PTPA seal of approval, the only way a company can get it is if other parents have tested those products and loved them.
That's wonderful. But you're here today because you did something very special. You crowdsourced a special survey for What She Said, where you asked your members what?
So we wanted to find out about single parenting. And I think we realized that there are a lot of struggles when it comes to single parenting, but I don't think until I actually read all the results of the surveys, I don't think I realized just how difficult it is. Aside from the financial things, aside from the emotional things, there's so much that goes into being a single parent, and they really need to be applauded. And I thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to share the results of that survey, talk a little bit more about it, find out what our audience thinks about it. So that's the reason we did the survey.
Okay, can we start with what we're actually classifying as a single parent? Because I've always had a little bit of an issue with divorced people referring to themselves as single parents.
Right.
If there is a spouse out there, lending a hand, I don't think you're actually single. So what was the criteria?
Okay, so it was really interesting because in my mind, I naturally think single parent, a divorced parent. So the people who responded, we had never married, so 38% of them were never married. We had divorced, 14% of them were divorced. Widowed, 3% of them were widowed, and this was what was particularly interesting to me. There were several women who responded to the survey and considered themselves single women, but in fact they did have spouses. Some were military spouses, so they traveled for months at a time, and some had spouses that are out of the house at least 4 days a week or more than that. So it was really interesting to me that they consider themselves single wives, single mothers rather, even though they actually have a spouse out there who comes home on the weekends.
I would call that part-time parenting.
Yeah, exactly.
be single. Okay,
Or you could have somebody like me who was married, whose husband showed up once every 10 days,
right,
who had nothing to do with the parenting at all.
Right, and that actually reminds me, we had sperm donors. So we had moms who had sperm donors, so that's probably a very similar situation, I guess.
We're going to refer to Dave as the sperm donor.
Okay. Well,
okay. We'll be hearing from him later. I've got a feeling about that.
A call-in shortly.
Okay, so that was the criteria, and what were some of the questions?
So we were asking them things like, so obviously there's hardships when you're running a single parent family. So we asked them whether they felt that finances or single income was the most difficult aspect to deal with of being a single parent. So there was no doubt that finances had a particularly stressful impact on the family. You are all of a sudden this one human being who has to support this entire family. When you have a two-income family, if one spouse loses their job, at least you can rely on the second one. If one spouse hates their job, at least they can choose to leave and rely on that second one. You all of a sudden, with a single parent, you have this responsibility and you are the only person who is responsible for providing for your children. So it gave some insight into just how difficult it is, on top of all the other things, but the financial side, that responsibility when you need to take a sick day. If you can't stand your boss, you can't just pick up and leave and make those independent choices because you don't have another person to rely on. So finances was huge. Moms also felt that due to their finances, they couldn't give their children everything they really wanted to give them. So they'd be in a shopping mall and their child would want something, or one of their friends bought something new to school, and the moms felt really, really guilty that they couldn't just go and buy everything they wanted or throw the lavish birthday parties that all the kids in schools are doing these days. And the other part that they found particularly hard, these were kind of the top three, they felt they had to be always on. There was no break from responsibilities. They were always having to make a decision. There was nobody to share that decision-making process with. So it was very, very exhausting, the whole concept of being always on.
Did anybody find that there was an upside?
They did. So, they loved the fact that they didn't have to consult with anyone. They weren't responsible to anyone in terms of the finances. They got to make decisions by themselves without having to worry about anybody else being disappointed in their decisions. No disagreements in terms of parenting styles. So it's your rules. The way you want it to go, that's the way it's going to go. The biggest plus, though, that we found through the moms is that they felt that they were able to create really unique relationships with their children. They are that single parent that child is spending the majority of their time with, and they are their entire lives. So these moms say they put everything into their children, and as a result have created these really amazing bonds that they feel they couldn't have otherwise created if there was a second spouse in the family.
What about things like guilt? Because I know that I felt guilty. I felt guilty that I'd picked the wrong partner, that my children did not have a male role model. I felt huge guilt.
Because you picked the wrong, that you
thought I felt that I picked the wrong, I thought that this person would be a good father because he came to the marriage with a daughter, so he had custody of a child, so I thought, and that didn't turn out to be the case, and so I felt guilty that I'd made the wrong choice that affected my children.
There was no doubt that there was a ton of guilt. In the responses we got from moms, they felt that caused them to overcompensate with their children in certain ways. They felt guilty. Again, it comes back to the finances. They felt guilty that they couldn't do everything they wanted to do for their children. They felt that they had to be that sole disciplinarian, so they were always the bad guys. So by the end of the day, there were lots of stories about moms who said, and I have to admit I do this too, even though I'm not a single parent, at the end of the day when their kids were asleep, they'd go into their kids' rooms and they'd whisper in their ears, "I'm sorry," because they had lost patience or they had been upset with their kids. So they felt really guilty because of their lack of patience. Also, some moms felt that not necessarily that they hadn't picked the right spouse, but they felt guilty that there wasn't a male figure in the family, in the home, to help look after the children, to give them that male role model that they felt they needed. So they felt a lot of guilt about that. I actually had a quote from one of the moms. She's a widow, and I thought it was a really good quote, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to share it with the audience. As a single full-time working parent, the load and responsibility falls entirely on you, which is often exhausting and impacts your ability to discipline effectively. When I'm tired and drained physically and mentally, it's so much harder for me to handle the whining from my children, which often results in me yelling at them to stop whining. It's not effective, but I feel some days I don't have the mental stamina to deal with all of the whining.
Okay, so with guilt comes compensating. How many parents felt that they overcompensated in the way that they for that guilt?
Right. So surprisingly, not a big portion of moms. So 16% of them said that they do overcompensate with gifts and some less discipline, so they let their kids get away with a lot more. 51% said they don't feel they overcompensate, and that to me was shocking because I really would have, my natural assumption was you feel all of this guilt, you must be going out and doing more for the kids. And then the balance said sometimes yes, sometimes no. It kind of depended on the situation.
Okay, that's interesting. So, because I don't know, when I would overcompensate by letting them stay up late. I mean, I'm not a single parent, but if I would, if we were talking about the things before, like you sneak in and say you're sorry, I might, let them stay up a little later, do little things. But I wonder how many single parents are worried about becoming helicopter parents because they are so involved creating those special bonds.
Right. And you know what? And maybe Christine, as a single parent, how did you feel? Did you overcompensate, or did you feel that, the way you were doing it was the right way and there was a certain amount of discipline?
She spoiled them rotten.
I don't believe that.
No, actually, I did. I spoiled them in some ways, and I was really, really tough in others. But I have to tell, the worst part for me was when they left to go to university.
Right.
So the empty nest syndrome for me was really, it wasn't a normal thing. It wasn't like, it was traumatic.
Right.
It took me a couple of years, and I was sort of almost, as Kate was, I love Kate's expression, gobsmacked. I was in shock for a couple of years because I was so used to 24/7, and suddenly there was nobody needed me. And I found
us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not I tried really hard not to be a helicopter parent, but I am the first person they call when something good happens, and the first person they call when something bad happens. So then I react very emotionally because I'm so excited that somebody needs me for something.
But when they were little, did you feel that you wanted to buy more things for them, or do more things for them, or let them stay up later? Do all of those things to make them feel better?
I was very strict with certain discipline, but I did try to probably do more things with them. I mean, I would sit up at Wonderland with them and 8 kids, which is my idea of hell on earth. I would drive to Buffalo so they could see the Spice Girls with all their friends. I would take them at 14 to the movie that came out at midnight and pick all their friends up at 2:30. So I did all that stuff.
So you did overcompensate them.
Yeah, I did.
See?
But
I was there for all that. What do you mean you did that?
But I was strict on things like, bedtimes, on helping out, keeping rooms clean, on their marks, on school, on all kinds of other things. I was really strict.
And I will say, actually, the respondents, one of the key things they said they did overcompensate with was outings. So that was interesting because they felt they couldn't stay at home with their children all the time. They felt they needed to entertain them. And the ones actually who come from divorced families felt that there was almost this competition, how much fun the child was having in their spouse's home or their ex-spouse's home. Or, that spouse might only have them a couple of days a week. So they're action-packed and fun-filled. And then they'd come home to the bad guy. So the bad guy mom wants to make them feel fantastic. So they take them to outings on a regular basis just to keep them constantly entertained.
I guess one of the challenges, too, is that there's nobody to temper, like, you have to make a decision. There's nobody to say, but, on the other hand, it wasn't that bad what he or she did.
Yeah.
It's hard to find a balance.
And it's that emotional connection. Most of the moms who responded felt that it was so difficult to have these amazing children that they loved to death, but they had all these amazing experiences and they had no one to share them with. A couple of the widows specifically had responded that they take to Facebook. They post amazing pictures of the first time or videos of the first time their child walked, or when their child said something funny. These are experiences that we usually turn to our spouse and share with our spouse, and they make us feel great, and we're so excited to share that news. When you're alone, it's almost like, who can I tell that to? So Facebook has actually proven to be a really fantastic outlet because they'll post a picture, or they'll post a story, and they'll get tons of likes, and they'll get tons of comments. And it really, it allows them to have some sort of relationship.
There's one quote here. It's hard not having someone who equally loves your kids to share the daily little moments and consult about the big things. Also having to plan ahead, knowing that you can't ever just step out to get something you need, but that you need to take the kids everywhere. And travel, going out. So many things are set up for a 2-person adult family. So there are lots of things. We are going to go into a break. We're going to talk more about the results of this poll and what message we can take from the respondents' answers when we come back here on What She Said. Stay with us.